Hey everyone, thank you for joining me. So, I have just read every book on the 2023 Booker Prize Longlist, with a view that maybe I could choose my own winner and whittle it down to my own shortlist. You know what? I've had a great time. But why did I start this challenge? Well, first of all, it started with this book. This is Time Shelter by Georgi Gospodinov. Now, I absolutely loved this book. This was the International Booker Prize winner for 2023. I chose this because I thought the cover design looked fantastic and it was a kind of plot that I don't normally encounter. I really went on to enjoy it. This had elements of humour but it had a real warmth to it. And it had some twists I never saw coming, and it was all set against this backdrop of taking inspiration from real life political events. Think things like Brexit and the recent weaponisation of nostalgia. That's the kind of stuff you get from this book. Really, really interesting. Now, if you don't know the Booker Prize, it was previously known as the Man Booker Prize. It is a British literary award chosen by a different panel of 5 judges each year. They start off with a long list, they whittle it down to a short list, and eventually choose one winner. This is the winner of the International Booker Prize, which is for any translated works. So I thought I really enjoyed Time Shelter, maybe I'll enjoy everything on the Booker Prize list. And because the official list got announced shortly after I picked this book up, it felt like the perfect opportunity to step in and read the full lot. Now, I went into every book on this list with no prior knowledge, no expectation. I didn't even read the blurb on the back. Now, that set me up to have no real biases, except for the fact that all of these came with a certain cachet because they were nominated for the award. So the first book I picked up was Western Lane by Chetna Maru. Now, this book really took me by surprise. Again, I went in knowing nothing about this book, but it turned out it was set in my hometown of Luton, England. Now, they don't actually go out to say that at any point in the book, but they constantly reference places from around the town. So I picked that up quite quickly and it almost certainly helped win me over. This book is an excellent exploration of grief, family dynamics and personal growth through the lens of competitive sports. Now, this is the story of a young girl who's recently lost her mother and has to be raised by her father. Picking up on some talent she shows early on, her father quickly immerses her in a rigorous training regime for squash. Now, this gradually becomes the primary focus in her life and the key link between her and her father. The novel skillfully uses squash both as a literal element and as a metaphor to delve into some of the other themes. This is a deeply evocative debut, rendered in sharp language that really effectively conveys the emotional aspects of the story. Sports is the backdrop, but sports is not the focus of this book. This is all about family and personal growth. One of the subplots that quickly comes forward is that her father is struggling to raise her by himself, so some other family members step in and it looks like she's going to be moving away from her father to be raised by someone else. That brings many other challenges. I like this book much more than I would have expected to. It touches on some really deep topics, but it manages them with sensitivity and self-awareness. Overall, Western Lane is a fantastic debut novel that offers great insight into loss and finding your own identity. The next novel I started was House of Doors by Tan Tuan Eng. Now, this book's had a lot of praise, but if I'm honest, it was a real slow burner for me, and if I wasn't running this challenge, it stood a high chance of becoming a did not finish. By the end, I wouldn't say it was a bad read, but I would say that all of the interesting points came in that third act, and I do think many people won't get to that point. House of Doors is a historical novel set in 1920s Penang, Malaysia. The story revolves around Robert Hamlin, a well-to-do lawyer, and his wife Leslie, a society hostess. But their life takes a strange turn with the arrival of an old friend Willie, a prominent writer struggling with financial issues, an unhappy marriage and ill health. The novel offers a compelling drama set against the backdrop of the British Empire, with a number of subplots that escalate as you progress through the story. The writing in this book really reminded me of Jane Austen's writing style, and I don't think that's just the period setting, but the actual way it's worded. Now, you might get excited by that, but for me personally, I've always struggled with Jane Austen books. They just don't engage me, and this book was kind of the same. It's not a book I'm going away disliking, but it's also not a book I'm going to rush to read again anytime soon. I followed that up with the next book, Prophet Song. Now, in stark contrast to House of Doors, I loved Prophet Song from the very first page. Most of these books I read on my Kindle, some I listened to audiobooks, but for this one I actually picked up the hard copy, which is just here. Now, this book was absolutely fantastic, and I'm really glad I've got the hard copy because I do see myself reading this again in the future. But a little rant here before we go on. This book is one of many on this list, and many that I've read recently, that has completely eschewed the paragraph to show just pages and pages of block text. Don't know if the camera will focus on that there. But as you can see, there are just no indentations, no paragraphs whatsoever. Now, it all makes the book feel a bit more visceral, like it's quickly happening, but it also makes every page feel a little bit more daunting. Is this a trend? I've definitely noticed it quite a few times lately, and I don't like it. I say we need to fight to keep the paragraph. Anyway, Prophet Song by Paul Lynch is a gripping and intense tale set in a dystopian Ireland. The country is sliding into authoritarian rule, and the story is set around a lady called Eilish. Her husband has just been arrested for taking part in a protest against the state. He hasn't even done anything particularly awful, but he's been locked away and she doesn't know when he's going to return. Eilish quickly has to fight for her family's survival. Lynch does an amazing job of portraying society's descent into war and its resonance beyond just the Irish setting. His fearless writing tackles large subjects like political violence and the effects of authoritarianism on ordinary lives. It's got a breathless and claustrophobic atmosphere that just fills you with a sense of urgency. Now, I ploughed through this book in just one day. That is how much of a page turner it really was. It's both shocking and tender. It's a story that a few years ago I would have said was quite unlikely to happen in a Western modern society, but nowadays it feels like a stark warning that this could happen to any of us. Now, it is a rough read. It's kind of like the kind of writing you'd see in Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I really do like that kind of book, but you need to go into it ready because it's not going to be easy. The next book on this list is Pearl by Sian Hughes, another Irish writer. The Irish are absolutely dominating this list, and for good reason. There's some fantastic performances. But an interesting little note for you, as I began to write my notes for this video, Pearl is the only book that I really had to rack my brain and say, what did happen in that again? Because I really couldn't remember. So maybe it left a bit less of a mark on me than some of the other titles in this list. But that said, I do look back on it warmly. Pearl is a haunting and reflective novel that again delves into themes of grief and loss. The story centres around Marianne, who at 8 years old loses her mother in unusual circumstances, and it has a big lasting impact on her, as of course it would. Now, the loss of parents is a theme that pops up continually on this list. The novel's structure plays a significant part in its storytelling, as time isn't linear, and I think that helps reflect the non-linear nature of memory and grief. The fact that you never really get over things, you just have some good days and some bad days. This approach, whilst evocative as a metaphor, can lead to some unsteady narration. And I think they're the kind of key points that I started to fade in this book. Sometimes it really has you and sometimes it just doesn't. In summary, I would say it is a worthwhile read. It's a beautifully crafted novel that weaves together some really tough themes. That brings me to the next title on my list, which was Bee Sting by Paul Murray, continuing the strong performance from the Irish. Now, this book was absolutely fantastic. Lots of the books on this list were very short and I could get through them in just a couple of days, but Bee Sting came in at 656 pages. And you know what? I never once felt it slow or lose my interest. Just a very well written novel. It's a compelling family drama set in contemporary Ireland. The novel focuses around the Barnes family, just as they're in the throes of different crises, whether economic, emotional or existential. It in turn explores the perspective of each different member of the family and the different struggles that they're going through at the time. We join them as Dickie's business is beginning to fail and the impact is felt right across the family. The novel is full of humour and sadness as it presents the characters' flaws with wit and compassion. The novel is split into 5 segments throughout the story and it changes character multiple times. Now, I was actually disappointed the first time it moved on because I was kind of buying into that first character and wanted to know where their story went. But I think Murray does a great job of winding each story together so it still feels like one cohesive narrative. You do see a range of writing styles as it jumps between these different characters, but I think the interesting twists that he throws in just pull it all together so well. Overall, it's an enthralling read that really makes it a standout on this list for me. Oh, and the ending. I never saw that coming. What a way to finish a book. Now, before we move on to the next book, I just wanted to say that this video has taken a lot of time and effort to put together, and it would mean so much to me if you could press the subscribe button and let me know you'd like to see more content like this in the future. Thank you. Next up, we have Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. Now, in stark contrast to the 656 pages of Bee Sting, we've got just around 200 pages in this short novella. Now, this is a weird book, almost hard to read. I really struggled with it at the start due to the unusual narration. It is an unsettling and philosophical exploration of prejudice, abuse, and guilt. We are introduced to an unnamed protagonist who is the youngest member of a family, and she's always been treated more as a servant than a direct member of the family, and that's had a massive impact on her outlook to the world. As the story kicks off, she is relocating to an unnamed northern country to become a housekeeper for her brother, who's recently been left by his wife. Her arrival coincides with several unusual and unfortunate events in the local community that lead to a feeling of suspicion surrounding her. The story is told exclusively from the protagonist's perspective, and as I say, she's been quite affected by the unusual life she's had, so we're left with quite an unreliable narration. This leaves you constantly questioning what is actually happening in the book. Now, at first, I didn't like this, but by the end, they kind of won me over because they'd managed to bury the lead on what was quite an interesting story. For me, this was thought-provoking and left lots of takeaways as I finished the book, and I do think I ended it more impressed than I thought I would be sort of 2/3 of the way through. It's only short, and I think I picked it up for a few quid, so I think it's worth checking out. That brings me to my next title, which was In Ascension by Martin McInnes. Now, this was very different to every other book on this list. This is a novel that intricately weaves together themes of technology, ecology, and the search for extraterrestrial life. It's all set against the backdrop of loneliness and the human struggle. The protagonist, Lee, comes from Rotterdam, where she was raised by a volatile father and emotionally absent mother. That leaves her, again, quite affected by her childhood, another theme that runs continually throughout these books. Lee's escape from this madness is swimming, and that time in the water leads her to a career in microbiology. What starts as a low-paying research position for Lee ends up taking her on a journey across the universe further than humanity has ever travelled before. Now, unusually, for a novel of this kind of scale, the narrative strength lies in the way it details the mundane, really focusing on the meticulous nature of that research background. It was for me, however, that same mundanity that was this book's downfall, and it continually failed to grab me. Despite these grandiose themes and the intellectual rigour, it just failed to engage me. I was constantly lost, and I continually had to go back and listen to sections again. Now, I say listen to because this is a book that I actually listened to on Audible. Now, frustratingly, the narration mirrored the kind of same mundanity as the tone of the writing had. I'm sure they did that on purpose, but it just made it such a drag to listen to. The prose, whilst intellectually rich, were often verbose and overwritten. Now, that's something I feared that lots of the books on this list would be, but by and large, they weren't. This title was. As someone who usually enjoys these kind of themes in books, I should have been very excited by this book and left it raving, but I just wasn't. It fell short, and to me, this one wasn't a winner. Maybe you'll take more from it than I did. So that brings me to my next title, This Other Eden, from Pulitzer Prize winning author Paul Harding. Now, this was a genuinely fantastic book. This was a beautifully crafted novel that delves into themes you don't usually encounter in modern literature. It's set on the fictional Apple Island, actually inspired by the real-life Malaga Island of Maine, which is something I didn't actually realise when I read this book and only found out later. The story kicks off in 1793 with a freed slave called Benjamin Honey, who sets up to build his new life on the island. Over time, a diverse and eccentric community forms, living in a harmonious, albeit challenging, environment. The story weaves through the lives of the islanders, focusing on Benjamin's descendants later down the line. As they form a tight-knit community, they face challenges of their own secluded environment, but also the impact of the burgeoning world around them. They face an increasing threat from the eugenics policies of the early 20th century, and the arrivals of those policies just throw the whole island into upheaval. Harding's literary prowess really shines forward in the way he builds these interesting characters. He does a really good job of balancing the idyllic yet challenging environment of Apple Island with the impending doom that you know is on the way. And he doesn't shy away from depicting the raw and rough life that these people have to deal with. What really sets sets this other Eden apart is the writing itself. The prose is evocative and each word feels like it's been perfectly chosen. This attention to detail contributes to the engaging nature and makes it for me a standout read. This novel felt big and powerful while still being an enjoyable and approachable read. I'll definitely be looking out for Paul Harding in the future. The next title on my list was How to Build a Boat by Elaine Feeney. This book portrays the story of Jamie O'Neill, a 13-year-old boy with a deep yearning to connect with his late mother. Set in the west coast of Ireland, this book follows Jamie's journey as he attempts to build a perpetual motion machine, a project he believes will help him connect to his mother who died giving birth to him. Now you might think, but the book's called How to Build a Boat, not How to Build a Perpetual Motion Machine. Well, with the help of a couple of key characters, Jamie's attention is shifted onto something a little more achievable that still reflects his views of his late mother. Feeney's writing is both atmospheric and grounded, effortlessly blending the ebb and flow of life with the central boat building plot. But it wasn't a perfect read for me, as at points the story can feel a little bit stilted with some unnecessary elements that don't really progress the narrative. I feel like Feeney could have taken direction from some writers like Claire Keegan and cut the novel in half. Just get to the really important points and leave you feeling impacted in a short time. Overall, it is a memorable tale of resilience, healing, and the importance of human connection. It's Feeney's ability to create believable characters that really makes this a worthwhile read. So that brings me to Old God's Time by Sebastian Barry. This story centres around the character of Tom Kettle, a recently retired 66-year-old Irish policeman who is settling into his new home next to a Victorian castle overlooking the Irish Sea. Barry does a great job of weaving together themes of love, grief, and long-lost secrets. The novel's interesting plot is not just a simple story, but it delves into a kind of quasi-mystery, and it gets really dark as it delves into themes of paedophilia and the impact of sexually abusive priests. The story is filled with violated innocence as it addresses the familiar and harrowing crimes of church and state. I think Barry does a great job of telling the story in a fresh and profound way. In summary, Old God's Time is a thought-provoking and beautifully written novel that tackles heavy and complex themes with sensitivity and depth. Although it does take you to some dark places, you're not left drowning in that misery at the end. Instead, the key takeaway is the kind of resilience of human spirit in getting past these traumas. It may sound heavy, but I really enjoyed it. Next up, we had If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery, and this felt like a real step away from many of the other books on this list, and I enjoyed reading this. It offers a vivid and complex exploration of identity, culture, and the immigrant experience. It's set primarily in the 1970s in Miami, and the story focuses on Topper and Sanya, who've recently escaped the political turmoil of their native Kingston, Jamaica. However, they soon discover that America is far from the utopian vision that they had imagined. The novel is structured as a collection of stories, each one intertwined and pulsing with its own blend of style, heart, and humour. The stories shift from the rough and gruesome to the hopeful and insightful, and this balance helps bring the book its own sense of depth. If I Survive You is a powerful and engaging read that offers a deep dive into the experience of immigrants and the impact of cultural identity. The novel's blend of humour and heart offered some relief to some of the other titles on this list. I definitely think it's worth checking out. So that brings me to my penultimate title, a book called A Spell of Good Things by Ayobami Adebayo. This is a novel that delves into the struggles of modern Nigeria as it looks through the lens of two families and the struggles they face therein. What's really interesting here is the setting of modern Nigeria, where the very wealthy and the very poor often find their lives intersecting, sometimes in very violent ways. This setting finds a somber study of how good intentions can be undone by money and abuse. We hear about the extreme lengths a family needs to go to pay school fees, the impact of corrupt political parties, and the influence of criminality. This was a slow-burning novel that I couldn't predict early on. In fact, when they set the scene, I expected it to go in a completely different direction. Now, I might mangle this a little bit from memory, but the name A Spell of Good Things comes from the fact that they say that life is a series of battles interspersed by the odd spell of good things. I thought this was a really good read, and it offered an interesting perspective into cultures I don't very often see. So that brings me to the very last book on this list, which was All the Little Bird Hearts by Victoria Lloyd Barlow. Now, this is a book that kind of teased at profundity, but for me it never really delivered. It felt like waiting for a kettle to boil just to realise that it's actually been unplugged all along. Now that might sound harsh, and it is kind of harsh, and that's not to say that this book had no merit, I just didn't really feel like it delivered on what it could have done. The prose is often beautiful, kind of lyrical, painting very vivid scenes, and there's a definite charm to its subtlety, and there are lots of moments where it kind of glimmers with potential. But I just felt like the story was always just on the cusp of a revelatory moment that was going to pull everything together, but that just never came. The story focuses on Sunday Forrester, an autistic woman navigating a complex relationship with her adolescent daughter, Dolly. They've got a very carefully balanced life of structure and rigidity, but that all changes when two new people move in next door, Vito and Rolly, who have a very different outlook on life than that what we've seen from Sunday. But it soon becomes apparent that Vita and Rolly may have hidden motives, particularly around Sunday's daughter, Dolly. I think the novel does excel in creating a strong psychological portrait, particularly of the autistic Sunday, but it just fell short in not delivering on that eventful ending. In short, it felt like a book that flirts with greatness but just never quite achieves it. I think I need that kind of cathartic ending where everything just comes together, and I didn't get that here. They do kind of tease a slight explanation in the final couple of scenes, but it just wasn't enough for me. I needed more. But don't let my opinion put you off. Maybe you will enjoy that subtlety more than I did. So that is every title on the list. And you know what? There was some fantastic reads in there. Some things that I would have not encountered unless I'd embarked on this challenge. Now, they do eventually whittle down the Booker Prize Longlist into a shortlist. So I've done exactly that. The top shortlist that I would say stood out for me in this list was Prophet Song, This Other Eden, Bee Sting, How to Build a Boat, Western Lane, and Old God's Time. Now in the time writing this video, they've actually released the official shortlist, which is quite similar to mine, but it does swap out How to Build a Boat and Old God's Time for If I Survived You and Study of Obedience. Now I think that's a strong list. There's nothing there I'm particularly against. I do think Study for Obedience wasn't quite there for me, so I wouldn't have been able to put that in my shortlist, but I understand how they could have done it. But there's no point having a shortlist if you're not going to have a winner. So what's my winner? Well, in third place, I would put Prophet Song. Now this book really stayed with me. It's the kind of book that I love to read. Anything dystopian, that's kind of all me. Throw in some political statements and I'm sold. In second place, This Other Eden. Such an awesome book. An interesting idea written in a fresh and engaging way. It leaves you marked with its ideas, but so glad that you crossed its path. Which leaves you with my grand winner, and for me there was no question which one that would be. It was Bee Sting by Paul Murray. This was by far the book I enjoyed the most. It grabbed me and I loved the character development and the incredible twists. It was aided in that character development by the length, but so worth your time to invest in a work as good as this. So that's my winner, and I'll look forward to hearing what the official winner is when that comes out. But what's your thoughts? Have you read any of these books on this list? Are you going to read any of the books on this list? I'd love for you to let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, a like would be appreciated, and a sub to the channel would be amazing. I'd love to see you next time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.